Bible reading is from Luke chapter 5, 36 to 39. Jesus also told them a parable. No one tears a patch from a new garment and sews it to an old garment. If he does, he will have torn the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins and will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. Instead, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. No one, after drinking old wine, wants a new wine, for he says, the old is good enough. Luke chapter 6, verses 6 to 11. On another Sabbath, Jesus entered the synagogue and was teaching. Now a man was there whose right hand was withered. The experts in the law and the Pharisees watched Jesus closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they could find a reason to accuse him. But he knew their thoughts and said to the man who had the withered hand, "Get up and stand here." So he rose and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath, or to do evil, to save a life or to destroy it?" After looking around at them all, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." The man did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with mindless rage and began debating with one another what they would do to Jesus.
Hello everyone. My name's Jono, for those of you I haven't met yet. Let me just get set up here. I've been coming to MCC for nearly 5 years. I'm not a pastor, I'm not a theological college student or anything like that. These are just my thoughts that I'd like to share with you all tonight. So I hope you find something encouraging from it. But I always encourage you to do your own reading, your own research, your own thinking, and ask questions as well. So tonight I want to discuss the topic of deconstruction. You might have heard this term thrown around here and there. Maybe it's something that you're currently exploring. But before we talk about what deconstruction is and what it isn't, I have a question for you. Who remembers this illustration of our solar system? Yeah, a fair few of us, yeah. Most of us grew up being taught that there were 9 planets in our solar system, right? So there's Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I'm not falling for that one, Shane. So right on the edge, right there is of our solar system back then was Pluto, which, fun fact, is actually no bigger than our moon. But in 2005, NASA scientists discovered an object beyond Pluto, which they named Eris. So like Pluto, Eris sits in a region of our outer solar system known as the Kuiper Belt. It's basically a donut-shaped ring of icy and rocky objects beyond Neptune, and it's where many of our short period or short length comets are believed to come from. So when scientists realized that Eris was actually slightly bigger than Pluto, our understanding of the solar system needed to change. Because now we didn't just have 9 planets, we could potentially have had 10. So as the astronomers looked more closely at the Kuiper Belt, they realized that Eris wasn't actually alone. There weren't just 1 or 2 Pluto-sized planets out there, or objects out there. There were dozens, maybe even hundreds. So in 2006, the International Astronomical Union met in Prague, and they did something pretty significant. They voted on a new definition of what a planet actually is. So from that point on, you can see the 3 criteria there. A planet had to meet these 3 things. It had to orbit the sun, has to be large enough for its gravity to pull itself into a round shape, and it has to have cleared its orbit of other debris. So for Eris, yes, it orbits the sun. It's large enough for it to be round, but it shares its object It shares its orbit with other objects in the Kuiper belt. So Eris actually didn't make the cut. But then someone was like, hold on, let's check Pluto. Pluto orbits the sun, even though it does so on a slightly different angle to the rest of our planets. It's small, but it is big enough to pull itself into a round shape. But like Eris, it belongs in the Kuiper belt, so it shares its orbit with other debris. Which means that Pluto doesn't meet the third criteria either. So in 2006, both Pluto and Eris were reclassified as dwarf planets, and that's how we ended up with our current 8 planets in our solar system. See, nothing in space had changed. Pluto didn't move, it didn't disappear. The solar system didn't rearrange itself. What changed was our understanding. And even though we're talking about planets, I think we all know that moment, that slightly uncomfortable feeling when you realize something that you were taught to believe was true might not be the whole picture after all. So maybe you felt that discomfort. That little moment where you think, hang on, wait. When it comes to science, most of us expect this kind of change. We expect understanding to grow. We expect categories to shift as we learn more about ourselves, our world, and our universe. We don't accuse astronomers of abandoning the truth when Pluto gets reclassified. We're not going to say, well, I guess space can't be trusted anymore. Instead, we just go, okay, we know more now. But what happens when that same kind of questioning shows up in faith? What happens when we start to question the Bible? See, this way of thinking is a key foundation of deconstruction. So what is deconstruction? The font there is very small. Dictionary.com defines deconstruction as the act or practice of breaking something down into constituent parts, or a philosophical and critical movement that questions all traditional assumptions about the ability of language to represent reality and emphasizes that a text has no stable reference or meaning. Otherwise put, a critical movement that questions forms, hierarchies, and assumptions that are thought to be fixed because of the language traditionally used to describe those forms, hierarchies, and assumptions. For me, my deconstruction journey started when I finally came to accept my sexuality. I remember wrestling deeply with everything that I'd been taught growing up in church. Verses kept running through my head like 2 Timothy 3:16, which says, all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. Or Psalm 119, verse 160, all your words are true. All your righteous laws are eternal. And then there's passages like Ephesians 6, where Paul talks about putting on the full armor of God, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the sword of the Spirit, standing firm when the day of evil comes. At that time, I thought the Bible was very clear about what it had to say on homosexuality. And that left me feeling stuck. Because if I questioned God's stance on this one issue, did that mean I was questioning everything I believed about God and Scripture? Could I just ignore that part and still believe the rest? No, I couldn't do that, because I'd been taught that Christians who cherry-picked the Bible to suit their lifestyle choices weren't real Christians at all. They couldn't possibly believe in the same God. Maybe you've wrestled with similar questions too. Maybe it wasn't about sexuality for you. Maybe it was something else that caused you to pause and rethink what you've been taught was God's truth. Questions like, why does the Bible seem to condone slavery? What does it really mean when we're told that faith without works is dead? Should we not let Pastor Denise get up here and speak because women should remain silent? Should victims of child abuse be told to obey their parents in everything? Should someone stay in an unloving or unsafe marriage because the church frowns upon divorce? If any of those questions stirred something in you, I want to encourage you by saying this. Having questions like these does not place you outside of faith. Questioning doesn't mean you failed, and it doesn't mean you're rebellious, and it certainly doesn't mean that God has stepped away from you. If anything, it often means you're taking faith seriously enough to stop and think about what you really believe. One of the myths many of us grew up with is the idea that faith is about certainty, about having the right answers and defending them at all costs. But when you read the Bible closely, that's not actually how faith shows up. Again and again, Scripture presents faith as something relational, lived and wrestled with. People argued with God. They questioned God. They misunderstood God. And yet God stays. Even Jesus himself steps into this tradition of questioning and reinterpretation. He regularly went to the synagogue, not just to listen quietly, but to engage Scripture with others. Because in his Jewish context, that was normal. In Jewish tradition, the Torah is not approached as a text that shuts down questions. It's approached as a text that invites them. From ancient times and to today, engaging the Torah has been a communal and conversational practice. Rather than one authoritative voice delivering a final interpretation, the Torah is explored through discussion, debate, and shared reflection. There's a well-known Jewish phrase, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. It's said with humor, but it points to something deeply valued, the idea that Scripture is rich enough to hold multiple perspectives at once. Rabbinic teaching encourages students to ask, why does the text say this and not that? What feels unclear or contradictory? How does this passage speak differently in different contexts? This reflects a belief that God's truth is not fragile. It can withstand curiosity. It can hold tension. And it can be returned to again and again as life circumstances change. Importantly, Jewish engagement with the Torah is not just about understanding the text. Interpretation is meant to lead to ethical living, compassion, justice, and faithfulness within real-world complexity. So when Jesus participates in synagogue discussions, asks questions, or rereads Scripture in new ways, he's not rejecting Jewish tradition. He's actually standing firm with it. In that sense, questioning, reinterpreting, revisiting, or, as we might call it, deconstructing Scripture isn't a modern invention or a sign of failing faith. Rather, it's one of the oldest ways people of faith have tried to stay faithful. So when Jesus talks about new wine needing new wineskins, he's not encouraging people to abandon Scripture. He's drawing from a tradition that already understood this truth. Living faith requires flexibility. Sometimes faithfulness looks like holding on, and sometimes it looks like making room. And maybe that helps reframe what some of us experience as deconstruction. Not as walking away from Scripture, but as stepping more deeply into a way of engaging it, a way that has always existed. So, where to from here? If deconstruction is a real part of faith and not something to fear, then a good question to ask now is, how do we walk this path well? Not recklessly, not alone, and not in a way that leaves us more fractured than whole. So I want to offer a few things that we can consider to help us stay grounded as we explore. So first, give yourself permission to go slowly. You don't need to dismantle everything at once. Faith that's worth having is worth taking time with. Questions don't demand immediate answers, and uncertainty doesn't mean you're stuck. Second, don't feel like you need to do this alone. Deconstruction in isolation can sometimes turn into despair. But deconstruction in community, especially safe, curious, compassionate community, can become a place of growth. That might look like a trusted friend, a small group, a mentor, or a community like MCC here, where questions are welcomed rather than policed. Third, learn from others who have walked this road before you. You're not the first person to ask these questions, even if it sometimes feels that way. This is where resources like podcasts, books, documentaries, and thoughtful conversations can be incredibly grounding. Hearing other people name what you've been carrying silently can be deeply affirming and maybe even healing. Here are a few that I recommend. Some of you may know the documentary 1946, the mistranslation that shifted culture. It explores how a single word homosexual entered English Bible translations in the mid-20th century and how that decision shaped decades of theology, policy, and personal pain. It's a powerful example of why context, history, and humility matter when we read Scripture, and why asking questions isn't a threat to faith. The three in the middle there are podcasts that I've listened to: Dirty Rotten Church Kids, The Deconstructionists, Faithful Deconstruction. That one's a good one if you want something short. It's an 8-episode podcast. And books as well. So Before You Lose Your Mind and Saving Jesus from the Church. I suggest these not because they provide the right answers, but because they can be companions for the journey. Fourth, hold Scripture with curiosity rather than with fear. Instead of asking, how do I defend this? Try asking, what is this text doing? Who was it written for? What might it be inviting me into? You're not weakening Scripture by reading it carefully. You're honoring it. And finally, pay attention to what brings life. Jesus says we will know things by their fruit. If a belief consistently produces fear, shame, or harm, it's worth asking whether it reflects the heart of God, or whether it's time for new wine and new wineskins. Deconstruction doesn't need to end in emptiness. It can make space for a faith that is more honest, more compassionate, and more deeply rooted than before. And that idea of paying attention to what brings life isn't something that we're just making up after the fact. It's something that we see Jesus do very deliberately. We see in Luke chapter 6, where Jesus enters the synagogue on the Sabbath, and there's a man there with a withered hand. The religious leaders are watching closely because they want to see whether Jesus will heal, essentially doing work on the Sabbath. A big no-no. Jesus knows exactly what's going on. He knows the rules, he knows the scriptures, he knows the arguments that can be made either way. Instead of sidestepping the moment, he names the tension out loud. He asks them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? So then he heals the man. What's striking here is that Jesus doesn't dismiss Scripture. He doesn't mock the law, and he doesn't say the Sabbath doesn't matter. What he does is interpret Scripture through the lens of love, mercy, and life. He chooses healing over rigidity. And this moment gives us a powerful lens for how Jesus would read our Bible that we have today. From what I can see, Jesus seems less concerned about whether an interpretation can be defended, and more concerned about whether it can bring life. less focused on whether it preserves religious order, and more focused on whether it reflects the heart of God. So when we find ourselves wrestling with difficult passages that seem to produce shame, exclusion, or harm, we're not being unfaithful by asking questions. We're actually following in Jesus' steps. We're asking ourselves, does this interpretation heal or does it wound? Does it restore or does it crush? Does it lead toward love or away from it? In the same way, Jesus refused to let Scripture be used to withhold healing. We're invited to read the Bible through his values when we bring it into our modern world. Not abandoning Scripture, not dismissing it, but letting Jesus show us how to handle it. Because if Jesus is the fullest revelation of God, then love isn't a footnote to Scripture. It's the lens that we should be reading it. Thank you.